Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to finish making the Joy original design toothbrush rug macaron. In part A, we made most of the shell, and in part B, we're going to do the filling and finishing. Let's get started. As you can see, the two parts of the shell that we made in part A fit perfectly together to form the macaron. The next thing that we need to do is turn them through so that they're right side out. Once they're turned through, you can adjust the shape until you have two perfectly formed half macaron shells. Now that we know how large our macaron is going to be, we need to measure how much lining fabric we'll need for the filling. To do this, measure the diameter of the macaron, including the side walls, from one rim to the other. You also need to add about a 1-inch seam allowance to each side. So for instance, mine will be about 19.5 inches. Measure this out onto your chosen lining fabric and cut away. Now we need to mark out the stitch line for our lining. For this you're going to need a large circle. My circle wasn't quite large enough, so using a tape measure, I mark out points to increase the size and sketch between those points. Then fold the fabric in half near the stitch line and tear away any excess. Using my sewing machine, I've stitched around the stitch line, and now it's time to turn through. There's no need to trim away all the excess fabric. This will just form part of the stuffing. I've now filled my lining bag with foam and sealed it up. As you can see, it is quite a lot larger than the macaron shell because I want a really firm finish on the macaron. Now it's time to move back to our macaron shells, and on one of them we're going to tie off the ends on the inside of the macaron by going through some loops on the back of the work. You don't need to trim away the excess fabric because it will be entirely sealed inside the macaron. Now it's time to start seamlessly joining our macaron shells together. As I said in part A of this video series, I had to get a little inventive with the toothbrush rug stitching to make this completely seamless. So take your time and don't be concerned if you have to unpick a little bit while you're getting used to the process. The first step is to take the threaded feature fabric needle through the last stitch on the macaron shell that's had its ends tied off. We'll call this macaron shell half A, and the macaron shell that hasn't been finished off, B. Once you've done that stitch, pull tight. The next stitch is going to be in macaron shell B and go through the next loop along. This stitch will go through the loop from above and underneath the core fabric. Pull tight. Moving back to side A, do the next stitch from above and pull through. The core fabric is not involved in this stitch. Continue working your way around the macaron, alternating between side A and side B for the stitches. Side B stitches go through the loop and below the core fabric. While side A stitches only go through a loop. When we're joining the macaron shell together, there's a few tips that will help you get a really nice result. The first tip is to make sure you pull each of the stitches on the feature fabric very tight. The second tip is to make sure that you keep the tension on the core fabric tight also. This will create a nice, smooth finish on the macaron. The third tip is, for all of the stitches, make sure that the excess feature fabric is above your work so it doesn't get tangled in your stitches. And finally, make sure you don't skip any loops or double up in any loops as you move around the macaron edge. Continue to work around the macaron edge until you've got just enough space to put the lining inside. Mine's about 3/4 of the way around. So now it's time to put the lining in the macaron shell. The only thing you need to make sure you do is line up the seam on the lining with a white filling on the macaron shell. Make sure that the lining completely fills the macaron shell on both the top and the bottom. When you're happy with the stuffing, you can continue with the same technique to close the rest of the seam. Make sure you go all the way to the last couple of stitches. And on the last B-side stitch, don't include the core fabric, just this one time. Once all the stitching is done, make sure you pull on the core fabric one last time to make sure it's tight all the way around. The final step is to take the core and feature fabrics and to do a double knot with them. You then push that double knot inside the macaron through one of the gaps in the stitches. To finish, thread the core fabric onto the needle and pass the needle through the same gap in the macaron shell that the knot went into, bringing out the tip several stitches away. You can then trim off the excess fabric. Repeat for the feature fabric. You can then squish your macaron into shape. And your macaron is done. I hope you enjoy this little bit of functional beauty in your home.